A Jurassic World was released, we got our first glimpse at a hybrid dinosaur in the series, the Indominus Rex, a proprietary blend of various animals and dinosaurs. Then, not long after, Fallen Kingdom introduced us to our second hybrid, the Indoraptor, sometimes nicknamed the Indominus Raptor, a horror movie-worthy creation that combined the body of a much larger dromaeosaur with insane agility, a sickle claw, and perhaps most noticeably, a pair of long, slender arms equipped with massive claws that would put Freddy Krueger to shame. And while it may be smaller than the Indominus Rex, this wombo combo of features arguably makes it even creepier, despite their many similarities. It's no mystery why these two creatures share traits, as the Indoraptor was essentially designed around the idea of what would happen if you combined the Indominus Rex with a real velociraptor. But as it turns out, we don't have to ask that question, because nature kind of already answered it for us. Just a really, really long time ago. About 150 million years ago, during the Mesozoic era, a family of theropods emerged that bore a striking resemblance to the Indoraptor, but in some ways, they were even more bizarre and arguably deadlier. These were the Megaraptorans, and just like the Indoraptor, this group, shrouded in secrecy and mystery, the Megaraptorans remain one of the most enigmatic theropods thanks to their limited fossil record. To this day, researchers can't even agree on where they come from, or what they truly are. But there's no debate about one thing. They would have been perfect Jurassic Park villains. Each species followed the same nightmarish body plan. And this right here is a prime example. What you're looking at isn't a giant sickle claw on the foot of some oversized raptor, but rather a hand. And it belonged to Megaraptor, the holotype of its family, and the first Megaraptoran ever discovered, unearthed in Argentina just before the turn of the century. As its name suggests, paleontologists initially thought they had found a massive dromaeosaur based on its gigantic claw, which they originally believed belonged to its foot. However, we now know that this was actually a hand claw located on its first finger, and it measured an astonishing 30 centimeters, 12 inches, about the same length as the longest Bowie knives in existence, or just as long as a standard ruler. This also meant that Megaraptor held the record for the longest claws of any predatory animal ever, a title that would eventually be beaten by none other than one of its own relatives. Over the next 2 decades, many more genera within this family were discovered, with a few proving to be even scarier than their predecessor. As of today, the total number of Megaraptorans stands at 11 different genera. And incredibly, these additional discoveries revealed that Megaraptoran claws were somehow even more lethal than first thought. Because these theropods didn't just have one built-in sword, they had two. Their second finger also sported enlarged, recurved claws, just like the first, meaning they had two ridiculously long, shockingly sharp, natural weapons. And what's even crazier, these claws were likely even longer in real life, as they were most likely covered in a keratinous sheath that could have added an extra 30% in length. And while their third finger didn't have giant claws like the first and second, it was still razor-sharp and incredibly powerful. What made these claws truly deadly wasn't just their shape and size, but also what backed them up, so to speak. Megaraptorans had robust, proportionally large arms and hands, which would have likely given theropods like Tyrannosaurus rex some serious insecurities. These arms were wrapped in thick muscles, and their bones were constructed in a way that made them both durable and highly flexible. This allowed Megaraptorans to freely maneuver their weapons with speed, giving them the ability to strike like a sword or stab like a spear, depending on the situation. And in both cases, their attacks would have resulted in catastrophic flesh wounds, massive internal damage, and almost certain death for their victims. But even the death of their prey wouldn't have stopped their claws' onslaught. Researchers believe that Megaraptorans likely used their claws to rip apart carcasses and tear bodies open, allowing them to access hard-to-reach meat and disembowel their food with ease. Now, at this point, I could stop here, and it would already be plenty clear why being hunted by a megaraptoran would be a nightmare. Yet, this still isn't the full picture. Oh no. To truly grasp the extent of their brutality, we need to talk about prey body size. You see, if a dinosaur was large enough, it's thought that megaraptorans would have hunted it by using giant, fatal claw strikes and deep slashes to bring it down before slicing their victim into smaller edible pieces. That already sounds horrific, but surprisingly, it was the lesser of two evils. For smaller dinosaurs, including ones about the size of a human, megaraptorans did something far more gruesome. They would first catch their prey, grip them tightly, and impale them like a shish kebab with their massive hooked claws. And then, while their prey was possibly still alive, they would eat them. Kind of like a person eating a slice of pizza, except the pizza is alive, skewered, and definitely screaming. We know this was very possible, as megaraptorans had hyperflexible, well-developed shoulders, unlike most predators, which implies they had a wide range of motion and could lift prey toward their waiting jaws. And while their claws were the real killers, their mouths were no joke either, and in some ways, they were actually more fascinating. Unlike most predators that had teeth similar to their relatives, megaraptors had vastly different dentition among them, each seeming to take inspiration from other infamous dinosaurs. For instance, Megaraptor had frontal teeth that were similar to those found in tyrannosauroids, being chisel-like with a D-shaped cross-section. Meanwhile, Raptor's front teeth were fang-like, resembling something straight out of a horror movie. It got even stranger with Australovenator and Orcaraptor, whose teeth were more akin to Compsognathids and Dromaeosaurs, smooth and flat on the front, but serrated on the back, built perfectly for slicing through flesh. The bizarre mimicry didn't stop there. Fukuiraptor had arguably the most unsettling teeth of them all, with laterally compressed, blade-like dentition that eerily resembled those of Kronosaurus, a marine reptile infamous for its shark-like teeth. Interestingly, studies suggest that megaraptors couldn't bite down with tremendous force or open their jaws as wide as some predators. However, given how efficiently designed their teeth were, this wasn't much of an issue when it came to having a deadly bite, especially when their formidable arms already provided more than enough killing power. In fact, when comparing them to the Indoraptor, megaraptors arguably come out on top. While the Indoraptor's teeth looked intimidating, they were actually quite small and better suited for gripping rather than tearing or puncturing, something that nature's own prehistoric nightmares had no trouble mastering. Monstrosities take the prize in both size and stature, and when comparing them to the Indoraptor, one of the closest matches would be Aeoniraptor, an Argentinian genus that weighed 1.1 tons and measured 7.5 meters, 25 feet in length, nearly identical to the stats of Dr. Wu's terrifying creation. But here's the crazy part. This isn't even considered large for this family. Instead, it's actually on the medium side, meaning there were even bigger and more nightmarish members of the Megaraptoran lineage. They could get much bigger. In fact, nearly half of the Megaraptorans were larger than an Indoraptor, with Orcaraptor, Megaraptor, and Tratayenia all exceeding 8 meters, 26 feet, in length. At this size, some of them were the largest predators in their environments, and a few achieved even more impressive feats. Currently, the largest Australian theropod is believed to have been a Megaraptoran, a fitting representative for a country well known for its terrifying wildlife. Still, Australia wasn't home to the biggest member of the family. Not even close. To meet a true giant, you'd have to travel back to late Cretaceous Argentina, where something even larger lurked. Seriously unlucky, you would have encountered the MIP. Yes, you heard that right, the MIP. But let me tell you, this somewhat funny-sounding name does not do it justice, as in reality, Nothing about this giant theropod was comedic, especially for its prey. Not only was it the largest member of its family, but it was also a massive theropod in general, with recovered bones suggesting a length of up to 10 meters, 33 feet, longer than even the largest confirmed Allosaurus specimens. At this size, MIP was undoubtedly the biggest and baddest theropod in Argentina, likely preying upon just about everything, including a variety of ankylosaurs, hadrosaurs, and ornithopods. It might have even been capable of hunting a coexisting titanosaur, the Nulatitan, by using its massive claws to tear and grip, while its mouth delivered the finishing blow. And while no claw fossil from this beast has been found yet, researchers estimate, based on its closest relatives, that they were at least 37.5 centimeters, 15 inches long, earning it the title of the predator with the largest claws, even if you include Freddy Krueger in the competition. This is a notion well reflected by its name, which, though it might not sound intimidating in English, actually holds a very sinister meaning, referencing a mythological entity known as the Shadow of Death, a creature that kills with cold wind. So yeah, stumbling into a dense forest and running into this thing? Not ideal. Clearing an area and suddenly spotting one of these creatures, or really, any Megaraptoran for that matter, would have been a heart-pounding moment. But what might truly stop your heart is seeing one start to run, because the moment it lifted its foot, you'd instantly realize that they were much faster than they should have been. And there's a reason for that. Many dinosaurs had hollow or pneumatized bones, meaning they were filled with air pockets, but in Megaraptorans, this pneumatization was taken to an extreme level. So extreme, in fact, that only one other theropod is known to rival their hollowness, the Neovenator. What's even more fascinating is that all of their bones had this characteristic, but their ilium, vertebrae, and ribs were especially hollow, which altogether made Megaraptorans remarkably lightweight for their size. For example, Megaraptor was estimated to be only around 1 ton, whereas an Allosaurus of similar length could have been 50% heavier. And it gets even crazier. Some species, like Australovenator, might have weighed no more than 310 kilograms, 680 pounds, despite measuring over 6 meters, 20 feet, in length. This has led some paleontologists to believe that certain genera were essentially the cheetahs of their time. This surprising lightness helped turn this group into agile and speedy killers, kind of like prehistoric ninjas wielding giant shurikens. It would have allowed even the larger ones to chase down smaller prey and launch stealthy ambushes. Not to mention, they also had slender leg bones that were strikingly similar in construction to those seen in coelurosaurs, reinforcing their adaptations for speed. And, no surprise, such a design worked flawlessly. Wonderfully, though unfortunately for others, this design proved to be highly effective, but tragically for them, others could even include their own kind. Fossil evidence has shown this explicitly, particularly in the case of a Merisraptor specimen, an Argentinian genus, which was found with a severely infected brain case. The cause? 2 distinct puncture marks on the side of its skull that, lo and behold, matched the teeth found in its own mouth, meaning the wounds likely came from a rival Megaraptoran. The infection was so extensive that the team who examined the skull estimated there was a greater than 50% chance that this individual succumbed to its injuries. But this aggressive attitude, paired with their lethal build, is precisely what allowed Megaraptorans to establish an expansive dominion, with species being known from 3 different continents: Australia, Asia, and South America, with Argentina, Australia, Thailand, and Japan serving as key strongholds for members of this deadly lineage. If you wanted to avoid running into one of these real-life Freddy Kruegers, you would have needed to steer clear of any sources of water, as Megaraptorans primarily thrived in wet environments, particularly fluvial regions and coastlines, where prey was abundant and diverse. There's even some speculation that certain members may have opportunistically hunted marine and semi-aquatic animals, including crocodilians, large turtles, and big fish. In fact, at one point, paleontologists initially believed that hunting in the water was actually the primary way megaraptorans acquired food, suggesting they used their massive claws to snare and spear fish. But nowadays, with a better understanding of their adaptations, this idea is considered highly unlikely. Instead, there is near-universal agreement that they were strictly terrestrial hunters, and many times the sole apex predators in their environment. However, this wasn't always the case, as fossil records indicate that megaraptorans had quite the rivalry with carcharodontosaurs, some of which were even larger and specialized in tackling big game. This competition was most intense in South America, where megaraptorans leaned into their agility and speed to gain an edge. However, it was only after the extinction of carcharodontosaurs, around 90 million years ago, that megaraptorans underwent a rapid size increase. But funnily enough, despite their long-standing competition with carcharodontosaurs, they coincidentally shared a in-brain case shape and design, leading some to believe that the two had comparable intelligence levels. Now, admittedly, carcharodontosaurs were no Indoraptor when it came to intelligence, but they have been compared to crocodiles, which, despite misconceptions, can actually be quite smart. Crocodiles are known to occasionally set traps, coordinate with each other, and even use tools to lure prey. So, if any of these traits rubbed off on carcharodontosaurs, and thereby on megaraptorans, then neighboring herbivores would have been in for quite the nasty surprise. Despite this shared similarity, on top of being the perfect killing machines, they were also quite the explorers. Despite their close yet questionable relationship with carcharodontosaurs, megaraptorans are currently not believed to be part of that clade. In fact, no one really knows what these enigmatic killers truly were. They obviously have their own family, but their exact place in the theropod evolutionary tree remains a mystery. As their name suggests, paleontologists originally thought they were giant dromaeosaurs, but this idea was eventually discarded since they lacked the signature enlarged toe claws. Then, researchers proposed that megaraptorans were part of Neovenatoridae, given their extremely hollowed bones, but that, too, didn't hold up. Since then, two new schools of thought have emerged. One side believes they were tyrannosauroids, meaning their closest relatives may have been tyrannosaurs, while the other side argues they were simply non-tyrannosauroid coelurosaurs, which, unfortunately, doesn't tell us much either. And the mystery doesn't end there, because we also don't know where they came from. The best guess so far is that they originated in Asia, possibly in the final days of the Jurassic. From there, they made their way to Australia sometime in the early Cretaceous. After that, they thrived and diversified, eventually continuing their conquest in South America, likely arriving via Antarctica. As the MIP itself, it's no surprise that megaraptorans only became scarier and more overpowered over time. They were so exceptionally good at both hunting and surviving that one could argue their traits were more effective than those of other theropods. When comparing their survival time against other major dinosaur groups, it's not even close. For example, tyrannosaurs existed for about 16 million years, spinosaurs for 46 million, chronosaurs for 64 million, and megalosaurs for 25 million. You get the idea. Meanwhile, megaraptorans managed to exist for over 84 million years, making them one of the longest-lived dinosaur lineages ever. And unlike many species that tend to get smaller over time, they only got bigger, deadlier, and more overpowered. In fact, the last known iteration of this family, the MIP, happened to be the largest and arguably the most lethal of them all. It really makes you wonder, how did they even go extinct? Well, it turns out that Mother Nature herself couldn't take them down. Like the non-avian dinosaurs as a whole, Megaraptorans were only wiped out after a massive meteor slammed into Earth 66 million years ago, bringing an end to all non-avian dinosaurs, including the last of the Megaraptorans. And to this day, we're still waiting for another animal to emerge with claws anywhere near as impressive as theirs.